The thing that needs to be changed is the narrative about what we're doing in Ukraine. Right now, the federal government is still letting the people believe, or trying to get the people to believe, that we're defending democracy in Ukraine.
Right.
And we're defending against Russia's spread into Europe.
Right.
That's not what we're doing in Ukraine. What we're doing in Ukraine is we are slowly bleeding Russian resources and testing cutting edge American weapons and projecting force to show NATO that they still need the United States to defend Europe. So foreign policy wise, we're winning in Ukraine. Russia's winning ground and territory, but we are winning according to American foreign policy requirements in Ukraine. For now, if NATO actually turns more populist, if we see, like if Macron, who just dissolved his legislature, if that gamble loses and they become a conservative government, and if Germany becomes a conservative government, now all of a sudden our foreign policy in Ukraine is going to have to change.
Right.
But the nice thing is, if more conservative governments take over in Europe, there will be more people who will step up to the plate to oppress Russia.
All right.
And we won't have to be the only ones doing it. Right now, we've got a very socialist, very liberal, very like laissez-faire Europe, because they're accustomed to letting the US call all the shots.
Right, right.
If that changes and we actually step away from Ukraine, theoretically, we would see other countries step into Ukraine.
But isn't, what I want to see is a ceasefire, right? So I think that's what most just voters in America want to see, like that are paying attention to what's going on over there, because we would rather have resources directed to the improvement of our own country. So we would like to see, and because Putin's a G, I like him. I hate the Biden administration. I hate the gaslighting. I hate the lying. And I love an underdog. So, and I know he's like a bad guy. I know he's poisoned officials, but how many dictators have we supported? Is Zelensky and their government a lot better than Russia? I don't think so.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that either. But a ceasefire, in the event of a ceasefire, the real question becomes, who gets the money for rebuilding Ukraine? Because if we don't get the money for rebuilding Ukraine, then we lost all of our investment. All of the money that we've sent in there is an investment in getting to be the ones that rebuild Ukraine. That's the MO.
Right.
What did I just tell you about what we did in UK and France and Germany?
But that's what I think people don't like, is because that goes to, the contractors in Washington, the military industrial complex, the senators that are, taking lobbying money from people that benefit from all the grain in Ukraine and all the resources under the ground and all the rebuilding contracts.
All of it comes to us. All that money comes to the U.S. economy.
But I think
it's all taxable, which is what gets put into our school systems and our everything else. And there's going to be, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of Americans who are in niche jobs, but who will be paid because of that effort.
Right.
Not to mention the reclaiming of all that illegally seized money that's going to be used to rebuild Ukraine. So it's not even going to cost US dollars to rebuild Ukraine, because they're just going to pull it out of the bank accounts that were illegally seized by from Russia. So we can't, a ceasefire or a Russian win means that all the money we've invested is gone. It's exactly what we did in Afghanistan. We spent 20 years investing in Afghanistan and it's all gone.
Right.
And now China gets the benefit of everything that we built there.
So I think that's probably where we're headed, though.
What we need to do is we need to find a treaty. That's what needs to happen, not a ceasefire.
Explain the difference between a ceasefire and a treaty. That's interesting.
Because a ceasefire basically means everything stays the same. We just stop shooting.
Right.
And then we go into debates about who gets what and who doesn't. Right. With a treaty, what that means is, this is your sovereign territory. This is my sovereign territory. If there's a treaty that's signed and if negotiations take place, what will most likely come out of that treaty is Russia will maintain control or create some new state on the eastern side of Ukraine. And then the western side of Ukraine will remain within Ukrainian sovereignty. Right. There's probably going to be some carve out where Zelensky's not allowed to stay in power or something like that. Right. He'll go in and he'll come to the United States and he'll be protected forever as a hero. But then what that means is at least we get to rebuild Western Ukraine and Russia gets to rebuild Eastern Ukraine. And then the next question just becomes, what do we do with all the Russian money that's tied up in American dollars and banks?
So
then we get some limited return on investment.
Sure. Okay. So perfect. Shouldn't we be talking to Putin? Shouldn't we be like, somebody pick up the phone and be like, okay, all right.
What's up is we probably are.
What?
We probably are.
You think so?
Absolutely. Somebody in Washington is talking to Putin.
He floated in a speech about a week ago his desire to see the war come to an end.
He's been saying that since the day that he invaded.
Right. So then why isn't it happening if we're picking up the phone?
So here's the predominant train of thought when it comes to my intel peers. Right. So the people I work in, my company is a direct to consumer company. But because of my background, I end up working in a lot of what's called private intelligence contracts, right? In the private intelligence community, you've got a bunch of people like me, former CIA, former FBI, former NSA, former whatever, former SEALs. Yeah. And we do things for other people that the federal government won't do or can't do. But in that community, what we believe happened is that Putin said, we don't have to have this war, we can end it. Zelensky, on the other side, was like, we don't have to have this war, we can end it. But he was under the advisement of the U.S. federal government. The U.S. federal government said, you can't cave this quickly. You can't stop this now. We can give you a bunch of money. We can help you fight this war. We can turn you into like a beacon of hope for the rest of the world. And then in the spring offensive in August, we're going to like have you take back most of Ukraine.
Right.
Well, all of that then played out, right? Everybody thought that the war was going to be over in weeks. I mean, senior analysts at MI6 and CIA and beyond were all like, this is going to last more than 4 or 6 weeks, right? I was out there saying it's not going to last very long. Well, then there was a twist, and then there was another twist, and then there was yet another twist, and then there was a spring offensive that was fully funded by the West that nobody saw coming, right? That was a successful feint in the north and the south and blah, blah, blah. And Russia and Ukraine came back and took back, I think it was like 5% of the land that Russia had taken. Well, then after that, there was this issue of a long-term conflict. Well, in the face of that long-term conflict, Zelensky went back to his U.S. advisors again, and he was like, are you guys going to be there with me forever? And now we were kind of like, we'll back you as long as possible under these conditions, right? You let us use our weapons, and you let us be this, and you let us dictate that, and you do what we tell you to do. And then at that point, NATO was like, we don't want to do this anymore. And that's when the NATO countries were like, this is kind of f***ed up, right? Because it's affecting Germany's winter, it's affecting everybody's energy aspects, it's messing with their economies. But Zelensky was in this place where now he's the hero of the world. He doesn't have a choice. He can't go back, right? If you recall, some of the incredibly brazen things that he was demanding in the first 6 months, they were impossible then, but somewhere he had somebody's advisory board telling him what to say, right? So now it's all up. So the idea is that what most likely happened is Putin and Zelensky were on the same page pretty early on.
Right.
Zelensky, not being a good statesman, got some bad promises from us.
Right.
And now he's stuck in a position where he's got to do our bidding.
Right. So this goes back to everything, my thesis of, my lay interest in foreign policy is that the rest of the world seems to want peace and we want conflict.
Correct. That is exactly correct. And we want that conflict because we are trying to remain the world's superpower.
So we can't remain the superpower without causing all these people to die and all this war and
they're not our people. It's not Americans dying.
All this instability and all this. I know it's not
our country. You got to get pragmatic about this, man.
Yeah.
How much of our economy is dependent on Russia? How much of it's dependent on Ukraine? Very, very little. Are there any American lives that are being lost because of American direction?
Right.
No. We are literally getting for free right now. The only thing that's happening is that our armament supply is down, but our armament supply is down because we've been shipping out a bunch of stuff that's been collecting dust.
I think
Meanwhile, we have modernized Ukraine's military with American weapons. So once this conflict does end, guess where they're going to have to buy the next shipment of weapons from? Us. What money are they going to use to buy those weapons? The Russian funds that were seized. Now, I hate the fact that we've put trillions of dollars, whatever the hell we've put into Ukraine, because that's been taken away from the American people.
Yeah.
The only way that makes it okay is if we get a 3-to-1 return in 2 years.
It's going to be a 3-to-1 return?
It's going to be a massive long-term return.
It seems like it mostly sloshes around at the top.
Oh yeah. You can't, that's the way it is. That's the way America works, man.
Do you think that you know, do you believe in karma? Do you believe in God? I think that's probably the stupidest question I've asked on this podcast. Andy Bustamante, do you believe in a higher power?
So I do believe in the Christian faith, and I believe in God. I believe in that. I do not believe in karma.
Okay, but
my wife believes in karma, and I love my wife.
Yeah,
but I just feel bad that she believes in karma.
Well, because we interview a lot of criminals, ex-criminals on this podcast, really high-level ones, and it seems like at the end of the day, doing that much wrong, and we'll just define wrong by like, you know, broad Christian terms, doctrine, right? Killing, poisoning with drugs, you know, and then all that other bad that comes with it, right? Lust for power, greed, all of that. Nobody ever gets away with anything at the end of the day, right? Sammy the Bull was here yesterday. He still did 22 years in prison, right? So if the government is just a collection of individuals as an entity, if all of these individuals do wrong, meaning destabilize, allow hundreds of thousands of people to get killed, whether they're Ukrainians or Russians, in a war that we could have just stopped, right? Long term, isn't that just going to cause our demise? Doesn't it have to? Doesn't it then become criminal? Killing and supporting killing or being behind killing.
So you're asking a philosophical question.
Yeah, but I think it's
based in theology.
Yeah.
So let me give you a theological answer. Okay. Do you remember the story of Moses bringing the people out of Israel, bringing the Israelites out of Israel?
Yeah.
Do you remember what the Bible passage said every time Pharaoh had a chance to let them go?
I'm reading it right now. It's a snooze fest.
It is. It's totally tough, right? Exodus is tough.
But go ahead.
But over and over again inside Exodus, what the Bible says is God did this thing that Moses asked for, and Pharaoh, his heart was hardened. That's what it says. Pharaoh's heart was hardened.
Right.
It doesn't say that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. It said that Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and then he kept pushing. He kept being the villain. It happened over and over again until the Israelites were finally led to leave, and then Pharaoh had this, then he went and tried to kill them in the desert, right? My point is, without Pharaoh, there is no Exodus story. Without Pharaoh, there is no Moses. Without Judas, there is no Jesus dying on a cross. The fact that we as human beings believe that there's such a thing as good and evil that we can understand, the fact that we keep trying to place everything in right and wrong buckets, it shows that we're not listening to the scripture, where the scripture says that our ways are not his ways. Like, God has a plan. God is omnipresent. God is God, and we cannot even begin to think or fathom the world through his eyes. So when we oversimplify stuff, just to your point, right? What we do wrong, and isn't that criminal, and isn't there this, and won't there be retribution? I can't help but at least ask the question, is Pharaoh in heaven or is Pharaoh in hell? Because God needed Pharaoh to execute his will. So I have no idea whether God grants Pharaoh some sort of different special service, or whether Pharaoh's damned forever. I have no idea, because God's ways are not my ways. I don't know. I can't even fathom it.
So you need bad just for context for good.
Without bad, there is no good. Without dark, there is no light. And I'm not trying to be philosophical. I'm just trying to say that since we can't answer those questions, I don't even try. Instead, all I try to do is talk about what's actually happening in real terms, not in ideological terms, not in theoretical terms, not according to disinformation and misinformation. Let's just call it what it actually is.
Okay. So thank you for that. Do you think, and you look at what's best for the United States above all else?
For me, I look first at myself and my family. And then I look at my country. And then everybody else can kind of go to hell.
So then when does this treaty happen, and how does it happen? Since we've missed so many opportunities, we sent Boris Johnson there to, torpedo a peace treaty at the beginning. How does it conclude? Is it after the election? Our election? Is that when the treaty's signed?
I think our election has to happen.
Right.
Because until our election happens, Zelensky's still stuck in the same position.
Right.
Right. Because he made a deal with the current administration.
Right.
Or the current administration made a deal with him.
Yeah.
So the administration at least has to change for the deal terms to change. But if the administration doesn't change, or if the administration changes in a way that doesn't benefit Zelensky, it may just continue going. But the thing is, the next Donald Trump stands to gain by ending the conflict in Ukraine. Politically.
I agree. Politically. I agree with you.
Right? He stands to gain by ending the conflict in Israel. Yeah. Even if the bad guy wins, he's the one that ended it, and he's the one that got us out of involvement. Because right now, it's just our dollars that are going to fight.
Right. Except
when we start talking about, American sailors having to attack Yemen. That's kind of some bull, right? But, and especially with things in the Middle East escalating to include Lebanon.
Okay, let's talk about that in a sec, though. So it sounds, I just want to wrap up with Russia. What I'm hearing is nothing's going to happen before this election.
It doesn't make sense for things to happen before the election.
Do you think if Trump gets in, what will happen to NATO?
There's a lot of questions. NATO is a bigger question than just Trump. Yeah. Because NATO also depends on what's going to happen within the countries in Europe that are going through their electoral cycle right now too. And keep in mind, we need to look at the conflict in Europe through a lens of knowing that the U.S. is trying to remain a superpower. That's the lens we have to look at. The Biden administration could very well go and essentially put pressure on Zelensky to call for a ceasefire so they can claim victory before the election.
Yes.
Right? They could very easily do that.
Would not shock me at all.
The only risk they're taking is if they call for a ceasefire and a ceasefire is granted, and they lose the election, then they lost all that momentum. Yeah. Right. So it's a tricky game, but it's a game. Right. And the reason that game is still being played is because American lives aren't being lost.
Wow.
If American lives are being lost, the American people would put a whole lot more pressure on the government. But right now, the government knows if it turns out in our favor, it's like I just got back from Las Vegas. That's essentially what Ukraine is. It's a giant craps table. Odds are we're going to get a 5-to-1 payout. But worst case scenario, we could get a 1.5 to 1 payout.
Right.
But the only way we lose is if we quit.
Right. But you don't think we should have got into it in the first place? It's a net negative for America.
So we should have never gotten involved. We should have let NATO decide how much NATO got involved because the containment and degradation of Russia was the original objective. But as a result of America getting involved, that's why everybody else got behind China, including India, or everybody else got involved, got behind Russia, right? Including India. India is an American ally. Yeah. And India got involved supporting Russia. And the only reason all that happened was because the United States came in and was the bully. If we would have forced Germany and Spain and France and the UK to do their own thing, it would have all turned out very differently. And US money would have been used in support of NATO instead of US money being used in support of the US and NATO having a problem with that.
So it sounds like, gosh, I don't know what to make of this. I'm always trying to come up with an answer with a bow tie on it with a period. Should we be the bully, or it doesn't sound like it's good for us to be the bully?
We should be the bully.
But you said it was because we were the bully that we're in this situation in Ukraine and Russia. Was that not clear?
No, you're right. We are in the situation. Remember what I also said is that it's good for us to be in Ukraine right now.
Right.
So we're the bully, and it's good for us right now.
Right. But long term, it's also bad for us.
Long term, we don't know.
Two truths.
Because we don't know what the future brings because we've pushed NATO away. Essentially, we became a bully that stopped being nice to the other kids that were on our side.
I see.
Right?
I see.
So
Right.
We're kind of not the popular bully anymore. And now there's other bullies that are coming up, and we're distracted.